Okay, our instructor for Veg Club is Carol Appenzeller. Carol thinks about growing food more than probably anyone should, and that is to our benefit. She's been growing great veggies for over 3 decades, at least half of which has been in the Northwest here on Bainbridge. And she has a lot of beds and grows a lot of veg. And we are really excited to have her as our instructor. Please welcome Carol Appenzeller. Take it away, Carol.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Hi, everybody. We're going to talk bugs tonight and all sorts of other critters that will get your garden. So before we start that, I want you to note that in the chat, every once in a while, there's going to be a link to our resources page. So I will frequently say this is on the resource page, and you can find that in the chat. If it's not there now, John's going to put it in every once in a while for people who get here late who can't get a hold of that. There are also videos of past classes. There's going to be a link in the chat for that. And also, if you have any questions, or if you want to get onto the mailing list for reminders about the class or the series, do email me. That my email is also going to show up in the chat. And John, do you want to talk about the URL? I mean, the Zoom link now? Before we start?
Just to say that we've kept the same Zoom link for 3 years, and we're going to be changing it for July. So if you're not on the update list with Carol, please get on the update list with Carol. And otherwise, you can look on, it will be on Bainbridge Islanders on the Facebook group page. Bainbridge Islanders, that's one place that I post it. Bainbridge Currents, the Arts and Humanities website calendar, put that on there as well. And it also goes on Nextdoor. But the best way is to get the updates with Carol through the email. And we'll have that email for you too.
Thanks, John. So I hope tonight that you share what's successful for you when we talk about pests and diseases. So I'm going to run through some of the basics in the area, and maybe it'll stimulate you to say, I've never had that one, but I want to know about this other one, and we can share our ideas. So what is out to get you? Everything. If it can get you as a category of life, you know, bacteria, viruses might attack you. They are pretty much adapted, some of them, to attacking plants as well. So fungus can get them. And of course, mammals and birds are going to get them. And they're part of the ecosystem. Plants are the very bottom of the food web. So it's super natural for the rest of the food web to try to consume them. And for bacteria and viruses and insects, that means what we call disease or pests. So yeah, so it's not personal when something happens. And that idea that having a perfectly untouched garden is what you're going for when it comes to pests or other living organisms trying to eat your plants is unrealistic, and it results in use of a lot of chemicals that are very broad sometimes, and it also it isn't very healthy not to have to have wiped out life in your garden so that really nothing is able to take part in your veg growing. So I'm not saying you should be glad that they're eating it, but if you look at the cabbages on the right side, aren't they gorgeous? They're super productive. They're just right. But you might, if you were nervous about pests, you would say, wow, what are those spots on this leaf up here? And why is it yellow? And you've got holes in the leaves. And what's that? And that's actually probably a bacterial wilt spot right there. And also these little white things are the beginnings of powdery mildew. But one of the things that we learn as we garden more is when is it at a level that's a problem for my production of my crops? When is it at a time when it's a problem? And when is it not? You know, I have certain insects in my garden and I don't panic about some levels of those insects. So this is developing powdery mildew, as a lot of things will in about September, when the ground is still very dry, but the air is quite moist. but it doesn't matter at this point. If this were a seedling, that would be a problem because they're easily overcome. So that's a idea that is part of what's called integrated pest management, that's designed to save farmers and other growers money, effort, and basically killing of unnecessarily, toxing the ecosystem. So we say, especially when we talk about slugs in Western Washington, mitigate, don't eradicate. So you shouldn't feel terrible if you still have slugs in your garden. I have thousands. But I grow a lot of really great food. And I'm sure a lot of us here do. One part of this sort of knowing when your plants are okay is knowing what your plants look like when they're healthy. So knowing whether 4 little green bugs in your garden is a problem or not is part of scouting, which means you spend time out there a lot, just naturally working on your garden, and you notice what levels are a problem and what levels aren't. And you get to know what your plants look like when they're being normal so that you can recognize disease more. So that's just something to keep in mind while we're growing. So speaking of levels that are a problem, this one is starting to produce a head, this cabbage, and it's got a few holes. I'm not concerned about that. This one obviously has got big problems. Typically it takes more than 10% damage to the leaves before the productivity is affected. This is more, and it probably has something eating, eager to eat inside the heads as well. This I'd be more curious about because this hasn't formed a head. It's still growing baby leaves, and it looks like the baby leaves are getting nibbled. So I would be curious about all of these. I'd even want to look around on this plant and see if I had some pest insects that were making those holes and do something about it. This one I'd be a little bit more interested, shall we say, in finding whoever's making those holes, because it could eat off this growth point. So that's just something to keep in mind. So let's look at a rogues gallery of things. And one top pest is cabbage loopers and cabbage worms. I hand pick these. You can just see them eating. Can you see 2 of these in the upper left picture? One is on the midrib. So one is right there. They hide on the midribs. They'll eat anything related to a cabbage. And the thing is that they aren't always this size. Sometimes they're bigger, and sometimes they just got out of the eggs and they're really small. So we're looking for different sizes. And hand picking typically works really well for people. If you have a lot of them and you really just are tired of hand picking, you can put a row cover on. So row covers were originally designed to help raise temperatures on plants. Like people would put them over in the winter, and it would raise the temp. So row cover looks like, let's see if I get there. It looks like this. It looks like really thin tissue paper, but it's stronger. So if you wanted to exclude insects from your plants because they were putting a lot of pressure on your plants, you could use a row cover. And this is one of the very lightest ones, which is why we use it in the summertime, because we don't want it to retain heat. And we want it to let as much light through so that the plants can grow quickly. And this one is Agribon brand, but their lightest version is AG15. So you can use that if you want to. You can put it over. These guys are 2 different organisms, really, that make caterpillars like this. There's a moth, that it's a brown moth, and then there's the white cabbage butterfly that flits through your garden. Sometimes people will see the leaves on, let's see, they'll see damage like on these leaves, but the worms will by then have moved in here. So you want to look on the leaves that are younger and the leaves that are damaged. What else? Oh yeah, there are lots of predatory wasps and insects, including yellow jackets, who will bob around your garden, and they'll sting these guys. And then it's gruesome, but they'll take them back piece by piece because it's too big to carry in some cases. They'll leave and they'll come back and they'll get it piece by piece and take it and feed it to their babies. So the March class, shoot, was it April? I think it was the April class. Yeah, was on insects that will help you by preying on these kinds of insects. So April class, you can go to the YouTube channel and you can find that class and watch it. Oh yeah, the eggs can look like this, but also they can look like this. And up close, these just look like that. And they're the underside of anything related to brassica, so collards and kale and cabbage and things like that. So they can look like that, or they can look like this. So here's my caution. If they're underneath a brassica leaf, they're probably these guys, they're probably cabbage loopers or cabbage worms. But if your brassica has aphids maybe, and they look like this, what you've got is ladybug. So that you don't wipe out ladybugs a whole lot, you might want to take a hand lens and look at them closely, because the ladybug eggs will probably be slick and these will probably be ridged or textured. So yeah, that can help you. Does anybody have something else you do to for cabbage loopers? Tell us what you've got. Do you find that hand picking is effective? Does anybody find that hand picking is an effective way to do it?
I did hand picking last year and it did work.
Good. I mean, it doesn't even take that long, right?
Yeah, you know, depending on how
Oh,
you
it took long.
well, you can
Okay,
see it
it
under
took-
your leaves and stuff, but yeah, it was quite effective. I got rid of them all and I had good
Yeah.
cabbage and stuff.
Yeah. When I have a yellow jacket nest, I don't advocate, as I said in the April class, I don't advocate having one, leaving one over your garage door or something. But when I have it in the park next to me and I know it's there, I have almost none of this because they're out hunting for food. And also other wasps. There are parasitoid and predatory wasps that will eat them. Leaf miners. Do y'all have leaf miners here? This happens on chard and spinach and beets. So this is a cross section of a leaf. And this is the midrib of the leaf, and that's the top skin, just to orient you. We're looking at a cross cut. And isn't this gorgeous inside? It is also home to insects. They'll put these guys on the bottom of the leaf, and then the babies can crawl in and they eat the inside, all while protected by the leaf, which is kind of cool. And they are an important way of plant food getting into the rest of the ecosystem. But also, it ticks me off. So I want them to die. So what I do is when I see this, hopefully when it's small, I just put my thumb under the leaf and my index finger on the top, and I squish the leaf wherever there is this damage, and also just on the healthy margin, because whoever's eating in here is not hanging out in the middle where there's no food. They're on the edge, making this area larger or over here. So even when it's big like this, I do the squishing. It's possible that you will have one where it's already eaten and it's already moved out as an adult, in which case I still squish it. You might, if it's super damaged and you don't like the look of it, you can remove it, but you don't want to get rid of too many of them. Does anybody have any other trick for leaf miners? I don't have a huge problem with them. It doesn't affect my plants very much. And the rest of the leaf is totally edible, so don't worry about it. It doesn't poison it or anything. What else? Root knot nematodes. This is not our most common problem here, but it does happen. Sometimes carrots break into multiple carrots in their body because of little stones and things. And people will often assume it's just rocky soil, but it can be really frustrating because you get perfect soil and it still does it. That can be root knot nematodes. Nematodes are little worm-like guys that look like this. The thing is, nematodes, some of them help us and some of them eat our carrots. So when they split and they have sort of warts on the sides like this, that is sometimes root knot nematodes. So a great way to avoid the problem is to make sure you don't plant carrots in the same bed all the time so their population doesn't grow. You will hear that crab meat will help, crab meal, like in this box. Crab meal is chitin, not calcium. It's the shells are made of this stuff called chitin, and fungus loves to eat chitin. And some of that fungus will trap, they have these little triggerable traps on this blue fungus, and it will trap nematodes. But that's a very slow process of growing more fungi. It's not specific to just this kind of fungus, and it traps all the nematodes. So I don't know if you want to go with crab meal on the long term, and crab meal costs quite a bit of money, but or if you would like to just make sure that you are rotating your carrots. Monterey nematode control is an extract from a tree. It suppresses the populations of all nematodes. So people who use it say, I was desperate. I just really want to get a good crop of straight carrots. And I only put it on my carrot bed at any one time. I don't put it anywhere else because I don't want to kill off the nematodes in the rest of my garden. And there have been good reports. I have used it once and it worked fine, worked very well for me. Does anybody else have anything you do for root knot nematodes? I bet not, because not that many people even address them. Carrots, if you want to get the best chance of success, I would say carrots in a raised bed, like a really deep raised bed, are awfully nice. You get some really nice carrots in there. Or even if you can find like a 40-gallon pot that's really, it's basically effectively a raised bed, a really deep pot, then that's pretty nice to put them in there as well. Whoops. Anybody who's new here, carrot rust fly is going to become your nemesis. Some people never get it, surprisingly. But if your carrots look like this and they have chewed up areas and little tunnels through them, sometimes you can see the little tunnels. This is the carrot rust fly. And the way the carrot rust fly works is when the carrot is not even very big, the carrot rust fly plants, lays an egg near it, and it hatches and it crawls over to the carrot and then makes its way down and then lives in your carrot. And that can be kind of a heartbreaker because they look so good, and then you pull them up and they do not look so good. So a way around that I would say, maybe please tell me if you have other ways that you do it, is to cover with a very light, that AG15, for example, row cover. So this is a row cover in my garden. And can you see that it has both been pleated? So it's way too big for the bed, seemingly. And it's been tucked. I don't know if you can tell, but I made a slice in the ground and I tucked the edges into the ground all the way around. It's tucked in because the larvae can crawl in and the flies can crawl in from the ground if you don't tuck it in. And it's really big, partly because I wanted to use this next year for something else and I didn't want to cut it down. So it's extra big, but it needs to be big because your carrots are going to grow to maybe 15 to 24 inches tall. Some of them get really tall depending on the variety. So it's going to do like a Jiffy Pop popcorn from the 70s on your garden bed, and it's going to get bigger and bigger, and we need lots of extra row cover for that. So what I do is I plant my carrots, and then as soon as they're up, they're just teeny tiny, I get my row cover, I cut around the bed, I make sure I'm not going to need a snack or anything, because all at once I want to weed it, thin it, and cover it, because I'm not frantic about it, but I don't leave it for a couple of hours, because you know when you deal with carrot tops, you can smell them. There's kind of carrot smell. So can the flies, so they'll be on their way. But it sounds like a lot of faff, but it's not. It's like one thing that you do, and it doesn't take very long. So I go out with my little cover, weed it, thin it, tuck it in. And you can water through this and just let them grow under there. Let me see. Has anybody tried one of those varieties? It's called like Resist-a-Fly. It's a variety of carrots. No.
Yeah,
I heard
tried.
about it. Oh, John, you tried it?
Yeah, I tried it a couple of years back. Well, probably about 5 years ago now. out of
Yeah.
Europe. I got them out of, I think forget where I found them, but they were a European thing.
Mhm.
And they seemed to work pretty well, but then I kind of stopped growing for other reasons for a couple of years. So, but I think they work fairly well as far as I can remember.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Resist a fly, says John McInnes. That's good.
I tried something last year, and it may have just been coincidental, but it may have helped. I was reading about companion planting, and it was said that planting carrots in amongst onions or garlic will tend to discourage the fly from coming. And I had much better carrots without what I usually get, because I usually get terrible root maggot from the fly. So that may have helped. I don't know.
Oh, that's nice. It's something to repeat anyway to see if it works, if it continues, right?
Right.
That's
Doing it
neat.
again this year.
Sorry. What were you saying, Emily?
Oh, I said I'm doing it again this year, and we'll see if it works.
Neat.
But I
Cool.
think I'm going to do your row cover anyway instead.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't mean to, you don't have to. You could do both if you have the space. All right, well, let's see what else is up, unless somebody else put it in anything in the chat. Nope, no info. Okay, so these are my 27 things that you can do about slugs, and please tell me the things you do about slugs. I'll just get this out of the way by reading them to you if you can't see them. So this is one of the reasons I use large starts that I've already started in cells outside of the ground, because then the slugs can't mow them off in one night. And if you are going to grow them, your starts, you want to keep them on a crate or the table that sticks out from the barbecue, or the somewhere on a deck, somewhere, not something that's close to the ground, not pots, not a pallet, like a wood pallet, because the slugs will just live under there and just come up and eat your stuff in the night. So that is a trick for starts. And I don't put mulch around little seedlings in the rainy season, but once they're bigger and things start to dry out, then I'll put the mulch on, because the slugs can live in the mulch. Watering in the morning instead of the evening has been found by agricultural researchers to be super powerful in reducing slug damage overnight. And I know people love copper tape. Kew Gardens even did like a big study, and there have been other studies where they say it doesn't make any difference, but some people find that it helps. I plant alyssum around my garden. I don't know exactly how many slugs I'd have if I didn't have the alyssum, but it's very airy, so that slugs don't tend to live underneath it, but it gives enough coverage that I get a lot of predatory beetles. And those beetles, they're the black beetles that run away when you pull things out in your garden. They eat, among many things, they eat, some of them eat some slugs. So that's kind of nice. And there's iron phosphate, which goes under the name of Sluggo. Iron phosphate is indeed non-toxic by itself, but it turns out that the reason it works is that there is an inactive ingredient that actually makes the iron phosphate toxic. And things that are toxic to soil life are toxic to soil life. So it's also toxic to other insects and slugs and things, I mean, worms and things like that. So I'm not saying if you put any Sluggo out that it's going to kill all of your soil life, but you could be aware, maybe want to be aware that it has that impact. You know, it doesn't have a positive impact on your soil life. And there have been vets who think that, who've had cases where pets were poisoned, and the only thing that they could see that it would be the Sluggo. So it's possible they'll sue me for that, but I'll try to be equivocal about it. I have used some Sluggo when I was desperate because certain things that I couldn't grow as starts and I wanted to put right in the ground were just getting mowed. So I did 10 different, I did things to keep the slugs away. And I put a little Sluggo in the lawn right around the edge. So I'm not pure either. So also, if you're new here and you cannot get the slug poop off the greens, off the lettuce, Just fill up a bin, put the lettuce in it, leave it for 10 minutes, and then it'll all come off easily. I think that when new neighbors move here, I should probably just walk over and tell them that right away. Barrett, what's up with your carrot seeds? Oh, right.
Yeah,
No,
I
the
have a hard
carrot-
time getting them even to the point where I can thin them. They just get eaten. And I usually put like a floating row cover over them, but I don't like tuck it in like you were saying.
Yeah, and if it's something that's already in the soil that's eating them, it's not the rust fly. They don't eat the tops.
Oh,
But
okay.
if it were something else that is going through there, you might just lock that thing into the bed if you put a cover on it, right? Do you seed heavily?
Yeah. And I seeded like 3 10-foot rows and I have like 5 little carrot plants left.
Yes, I have had this problem myself. Do you seed them all in one line?
Yeah, they kind of start at the edge, it seems like,
Oh, like
like at
one
the
end?
end of the bed. So maybe
Yeah.
they're like finding their way in.
Is there a hiding place at the end of those beds? Like I find that I get more damage to carrots when it's next to a mulched bed because somebody's coming out from underneath the mulch.
Well, we have mulch all around our beds. So they're like we
Oh
have
yeah.
wood chips all around.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they're hiding in there.
If it weren't, yeah, they may be. If it weren't raining, like if it's not going to rain this week, you could put diatomaceous earth around the outer edge of that bed and between the carrots rows and see if you can like reseed and then see if that would keep any arthropod away. Anything with an
Oh,
exoskeleton would be
okay.
irritated by that. Somebody else, give me an answer. Give us an answer. What would you try in this situation? Would you go out at night and see if it's tiny gray slugs eating them off? Send John out with a headlamp. Barrett doesn't want to go out. Has anybody figured out what is eating off their carrots? Nobody. Okay, well, one thing that people, oh, what?
That was me just saying,
That was Barrett, sorry. One thing that people do is they'll seed in a wide band so that you can get more carrots in that wide band. And then so that you're not just doing it in one string where you have to pack them together to get a lot of carrots in that space. So it'll be like a 5-inch band and they'll seed within that band evenly. And then whoever comes through and mows them down doesn't get all of them. That's one of the ways. So we've got diatomaceous earth. You can try a cover. You could try looking to see who it is. Because sometimes slugs, depending on the substrate, you can't see the slug slime.
Okay, thanks. Those are all good
You
suggestions.
could try slug traps too. I'll show you slug traps in a minute. Tell me your other slug tips, everybody. Diane Howerton, you got any slug tips?
No, I'm a very casual gardener.
Oh, right,
I give
so
up,
far,
I give
right.
up easily, and I just over plant, and they get some, and I get some, and we're all good.
Yeah, that is a way to do it. Just plant an incredibly large number of carrots. But it sounds like you did, Barrett.
Yeah, but I like your idea of doing a really thick band.
Oh, and you know what? You get to plant again on the 4th of July or like around there for a winter crop of carrots that can stay in the ground. So the conditions will be a little bit different then. So you might get more, it's going to be drier.
That's
So
what I
you
was
might
thinking. I would try to plant again for the fall or winter crop.
Yeah, and it feels like you can do it in September, but don't do it on the 4th of July.
Okay.
There you go. Okay. Oh, check it out in the chat if you're not looking. John is switching to raised beds. Oh, is it a good list for what to row cover? John, I mean, I don't even row cover. I definitely do my carrots. And if you don't want leaf miners in your beets and worms on your cabbage and leaf miners in your chard, yeah, I think that's a good That's good. Radishes, why would you do radishes under row cover? Because it's a brassica?
Well, I've always had, when I've grown them in the past, I've always had, and I never knew quite what it was. I assume it was one of the cabbage things, always kind of wormholes in them.
Oh, yes. Do you know what does that in mine? Is baby click beetles. They're called wireworms. And once a wireworm takes a bite, then a gray slug will come along and get in there. You might try
Okay.
a little bit of diatomaceous earth around them.
And I switched to raised beds, and what I ended up using was the stock tanks, the cattle tanks type of thing.
Yeah.
And then what I did was cut the bottom out, because
Oh,
I
you
couldn't
did.
get
I was
the
curious about that.
yeah, I couldn't get. I went down to Silverdale. Was it Farm Store or whatever down there, and they didn't have any of the raised beds planters without the bottoms, and so I put them on order, and I called and I called, and they never got a commitment type of thing. So I said, cancel the order. I'm going to get get some stock tanks, watering tanks for cattle.
Mm-hmm.
And I cut the bottoms out.
Nice.
And so then I'll use those in the winter as covers. But anyway, so what I have now is a nice rounded end, 6 feet or 8 feet, depending on which. We've got 15 of them. And putting a row cover over is really easy at this point. I can take my welded wire fencing type stuff, make a nice little dome like you do, and then so I can put a row cover over really easy.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I bought a big roll of it down at Wilco in Bremerton yesterday. And then I bought some ratchet straps that are long enough to go around. So I'm just going to put the welded wire dome over them, drape the row cover over, ratchet strap it down, and away I go. So I figured those things the things I've listed, I have a kind of a truncated list this year because I'm busy putting up the raised beds. But what I put there was what yeah. So what I put there is what I'm doing, yes or no, as far as under row cover or not.
Oh, yeah. Right. It looks good to me. Anybody else have anything to say? I mean, a lot of those things will grow too tall for green beans, will get too tall for row cover anyway.
Well, if I put the dome over it, the dome is going to go up when I use the welded wire. The dome, which is similar to your mesh that you use, the rebar mesh, pretty similar, except it's galvanized. So it will dome up to about 2-3 feet. And other things like green beans, snap peas, cucumbers, and all those types of things, I ended up using hog panel and made an A-frame out of it between the raised beds. Cool. Those obviously I'm not going to cover. But these things here, I might cover some of that stuff when I plant them ahead of putting up the hog wire to climb onto. But anyway, I was just curious because it's not going to be difficult for me to throw a row cover on because of the way I went about things with the tanks. For sure. The rounded ends, that's going to work, I think, really well.
I have a row cover on my peppers, and it has UV resistant plastic over the top, and it's vented as needed because it keeps everything warmer, and it seems like they grow faster for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm going to try.
Able to take that off, so I don't know if that would work for you.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to do for next year is make little hot houses out of them, out of a couple of them, or make a couple of little where I can set them on the tanks and away I go. So
yes, my eggplants and peppers are under hot houses right now. Yeah. And if you're interested in those little hot houses, there's a little description in the March class.
Okay.
The things that, John, you were already there, and the ones that John is talking about as either for protection or for heat. Okay, here we go. Oh yeah, you can try beer traps. I'm not saying it'll take all the slugs out of your garden, but slugs love this leaf mulch. So every one of these little things is a beer trap. It's a yogurt container, a really tall one. That's a lid. It happens to have a clear lid. I don't know. Squint at your screen so you can see it. Right under the top edge, I've made a square hole, but it's about 4 inches from the bottom of the container. The bottom of the container is shoved a little bit into the ground. The reason you want that hole above ground is you want the slugs to go up and have to make an effort to get in there. if you have the hole at ground level, all the bugs you love just walk in and kill themselves in the beer. So we want the good guys not to get in the beer trap. And we have a lid on it so that the rain doesn't spoil the beer, and you get the cheapest beer you can and stick them all over the place. I think there are, there are 20 beer traps out there. I find it really effective from about January. It's miserable to put them out in January, but if you have a lot of self-discipline, you can do it. January, February, March, April, they're still out there. But that's when the slugs are coming to life and they're really hungry, but there's hardly anything else that they're really interested in January and February in the garden, or March even. So this is end of March. And in 48 hours, I had these guys in one of the beer traps. So it was that trap right there. And that's 30 slugs. I counted them. So that's 6,000, 600 slugs. Anyway, 600, not 6,000. Anyway, I'm glad to kill those. That's fine. It helps. Hey, has anybody else had experience with slug traps?
I did one thing. It's not exactly a trap. But when I planted my pea seeds, I had tried to do starts and I only had a few that came up. I bought a greenhouse I'm going to be setting up now to replace what I used this year. But anyway, so I planted it, direct sowed a variety of different peas. And you had mentioned they like to be in cohorts. So
yeah, they do, yeah.
So I planted 3 seeds near each other and inverted a 4-inch clear planter pot over them and pinned them down with those long garden staples. To keep, I was mostly trying to keep the birds from eating them before they were germinated, but I left them on there until the little cups were full, so that by the time I took them off, they would be big enough that if the little slug action happened, they might survive.
Oh yeah. And it works.
Then they wouldn't just get mowed down. So far, so good.
Right.
Yeah.
And the birds aren't going to come eat them, which they love to do because they know there's a pea at the bottom of that shoot.
Right. But
Yeah.
they're too big now for the birds, and I'm hoping they're too big for the slugs.
Absolutely. Cool. Lovely. Yeah. Help them grow faster too, I bet. And now they want out because it's going to get warm. Oh, that's great. That's
I know,
really
they look great. I lucked out on the weather timing.
Yay. That's really good. Let's talk cutworms. Cutworms, that's the grown-up. Then they lay an egg and it hatches and it turns into a big fat caterpillar-like thing. And then it goes to pupate. So it's kind of like a cocoon. And this is wiggly. It looks like it's completely dormant, but if you have it in your hand, it might wiggle. And then in a few weeks, out comes the adults. I think they're just fine. I don't object to them, except when they eat right through my seedlings. So this is what they do. And then they curl up and sometimes they'll take a nap. You can sometimes see one sleeping next to its lunch. And it's extra frustrating because they don't eat the whole thing. They just eat right through it. So I have these in my beds. I've got grass. I put some of my beds, I cut right into my lawn. And these moths like the lawn. They like grasses. So if I dig a 4x8 bed, I'm probably going to find one of these. I will tell you, in how many years? 17 years of gardening here, I've had one problem with them. So they're around, but I wouldn't panic when you see them. If you have symptoms, if you have signs of these guys cutting off your seedlings, then I'd say it's a problem. But I'm not afraid of these guys. If you were very concerned, like you just were really adamant that your corn survive, you can put little hoops around so the worms can't get to them. I wouldn't do that on an acre of corn, but you could do it on a little patch of corn if you care. So mostly I'm saying, for me, not a problem. Tell me later if it's your problem for you. Make a note. Here's root maggot. Not that many people have run into this, but it does happen if you garden long enough. It's a fly, it lays an egg, and then their babies eat the roots. And so how you know that's happening is you're watering it, and it's just acting like you haven't watered it forever, for days and days. So you can put a little cardboard around there and make sure there's an X in this part of the cardboard so that the plant can grow. If you're growing starts of brassicas outside, brassicas is anything related to a cabbage, and you're either very fastidious or you know you've got these guys in your garden already and you don't want them again, you can put row cover, like that Agribon row cover, not only over the top of your starts, but underneath. So put the row cover down, put the starts on, put it loosely over the top and tuck it in. So yeah, so that flies don't go underneath. That would be if you had a big problem with them or you knew that you had them. There's also a nematode you can use. It's a little bit of faff to use it, but there's a link to this. You can buy the basically eggs of the nematode, and then you spray them with a hose end sprayer, and then you have to keep it wet for like 12 days, and it will help you to fight these guys. But you're unlikely to need it, but I just want you to have this in your quiver so you can say, oh, wait, I think I know about this. I'm going to go back and maybe look at the video or the resource page or something like that so that you know about that, because that is a thing we have in the Northwest. Aphids, there's a general one. What's up, John?
Sorry, don't those root maggots also get into the radishes?
Oh, well, radishes are brassicas, so maybe they do.
Yeah, I think that was my problem. I think now that you're going over this, I believe it was cabbage root maggot in my radishes. I think that was my problem.
Oh, okay. So that's a fly. So you could just immediately cover that bed and tuck the edges in.
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay. I see what you're thinking. Thanks. Which you said you were going to do. Okie doke. So aphids. Oh, what's up?
Oh, I just wanted to say I've had a big problem with the root maggots and tried a number of different things. The little collars work for the root maggots, and the slugs like to hide under them.
Oh, they sure do.
You have to look for slugs.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, right. So I guess that's an argument for really big starts when you put them in, I suppose. But well, yeah, you can't win. But I'm glad it worked for root maggot. That's good to know. Okay, aphids. Here's the thing about aphids. Did you know? I don't know if it's all aphids, but some of them give live birth and they produce 5 babies a day. So one aphid with wings lands on a plant and starts making babies. And those babies don't have wings. So you see, these don't look like they have wings, right? At least most of them. And they'll build up a population until it gets really big. And then they'll start making aphids with wings. And those will go to other plants. So experienced gardeners, have you ever noticed that you'll have like a whole bunch of brassicas and only one of them has a problem, has aphids building up? If that happens, you want to stop them because they're building up their population to go to the rest of the garden. But the really great thing is you can just stop them on there, and that can really help. So that doesn't always happen that you just get it on one, but how do you get them off? They always say, give it a spray with strong spray of water. It takes more strength to spray the aphids off, in my experience, than the plant can handle. Like to spray hard enough, it seems like I'm going to damage the plant. So I support the leaf, and then I end up rubbing my fingers on it anyway, and I'm basically rubbing them off and rinsing them off with the water. So that definitely can help. Sometimes people will rogue out if you have a really infested plant, especially if you have a big garden, you know, like 25 cabbages or something, and you have one that's a problem, you can take that out. Farmers will do that. They'll just take out whatever's infested. And you want to make sure you don't get the aphids all over the rest of the garden. Get rid of that. Sometimes if I have aphids like just inside the heart of a celery plant, they love to live in there because it's wet-ish and protected. I'll take a tiny pinch of diatomaceous earth and just sprinkle it in there. Or maybe I just drop the diatomaceous earth just on these aphids. The thing is, diatomaceous earth, even though it's not a dangerous chemical, it is a killer of anything that has an exoskeleton. So I would not put it everywhere. And also don't breathe it when you're doing it. It's not poison. It just breaks the exoskeleton at the joints for these organisms. And everybody gets aphids on their nasturtiums, black aphids on the undersides of the leaves. And what you can do is pull them out and then make sure that some of the seeds of the nasturtiums get poked into the ground and water them, and they will come up and make you a lovely fall crop of nasturtiums. Does anybody, was that not clear about aphids, or do you have other things you do about aphids? John, I know you blasted your plum tree about 5 times. Finally worked, right?
Yeah, the other thing that we did was we put a sticky substance on the trunk to keep the ants out of the equation. And we did that 2 years in a row, and we have no aphids this year on that Italian plum tree. We had 3 years in a row and no aphids at all this year.
Interesting. Oh, also parasitic insects, predatory insects will eat aphids. So you can support your predatory and parasitoid insects. And that is the April Zoom session on video on the Veg Club channel. So the link's in the chat, somewhere in the chat today.
And I heard that a solution of soap, like dish soap and water for aphids.
Yeah, that will help them come off the plant and can smother them. Do you find that's helpful? Have you used it?
No, I'm pretty new this year for my garden. That was an old piece of information from decades ago.
Yeah, if you overuse it, it can sometimes harm the plants, but give it a go judiciously. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what else. Oh, I have these guys or something similar in my garden, which is, they're so cool because the babies are different colors and different patterns from the grown-ups. And I know that having a few of them is fine, and having tons and tons of them is my cutoff level for these guys, where they start to do some damage. And also I look at where they're living. So I noticed that they were in some really dense overplanting that I had done. I just let some of these certain annual plants just go nuts, and they were too crowded and they were crowding out shrubs and stuff. And these guys were living in there. So since I had observed my garden a lot, just kind of accidentally, I realized that not having thinned that out caused them to be able to pop the population up. And these guys, whenever you try to get them off the plants, they fall to the ground on purpose. And then aphids fall to the ground, they just enter the food web. They can't really get back up on the plant. But these guys potentially could get back up on the plant after they fall off. So it's adaptive for them to drop, because then they won't get preyed on by birds or me. But you know what they're not good at evading is the dust buster. So that picture on the right hand is not me, but I put my hand under the leaves and I just suck these guys into the dust buster if I need to get rid of them. Or I can put my hand underneath and just tap and they'll fall in. So I think if you have some larger insect like this, it can help. Now it probably gives you the image of my, attacking the entire garden. These guys tend to stick to certain plants. And so I just say, you know what, I see 100 of you on there. I'm just going to make it so there are only 20 of you left. And I control the population a little bit every once in a while. I only have to do it at once every few years. But I think it's an interesting concept. Let's look at some bacteria that could get you. This is fairly new to even the US. It hasn't been in the US very long, and it certainly hasn't been in the Northwest very long. It's basal downy mildew, and it tends not to be able to cross veins. So although this whole section is infected, you could see that it's not making it past these veins very easily. So that tells you that it might be a downy mildew, and it's probably at least some kind of fungus. Sometimes the back of the leaf looks like this. Sometimes it does not look speckly and it doesn't look very fuzzy on the back. But water is the friend of basal downy mildew. So watering the soil instead of the leaves is good. Watering in the morning so things can dry out is good. Space the plants apart so that it's less humid. Also, you can get this Prospera variety of basil. And it has been worked on and bred conventionally for a very long time. I think Cornell University did it, and you can find the link in the resource page. And this stuff has, we had a lot of basil downy mildew on the island, showed up maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And now a lot of people are using Prospera basil. Clubroot is a terrible thing. Has anybody ever had clubroot? I'm yelling like you'll hear me better.
Yes.
I just want to say,
I
you
have.
have. You have,
Yes.
Emily. So did you have to move? What did you do?
I made a map of my garden, and
Sure.
every year that I got some, I shaded in the little part of the garden that had it, and I didn't plant brassicas in those parts of the garden for probably a decade.
Right.
And I haven't had any lately.
Oh my gosh, that's hopeful, because I got some off of a tool that a friend told me was clean. So I'm still mad at him, and it's been like 5 years. Okay, so it can live a really long time. It's what your point is, right? You didn't grow brassicas in those beds for a long time. Did you clean your tools that you used in those beds before you went to other beds or not?
I was not smart enough to do that, no.
Well, it's a surprise to a lot of people. It spreads a lot very easily on tools. I'm not saying you're gonna get it. It's just to other gardeners. But if you see lumpy roots like this on a brassica of any kind, or you see this kind of spotty success, like this field has, some of them are okay, but some of them are just really puny, it could very well be clubroot. And you can see it can live 20 years. They always say don't grow in that bed for 7. And transplants, you want to make sure your transplants roots look healthy. And tools, if you borrow a tool, the only thing that kills it is Lysol, like the old kind, in the spray can from the 70s with the poison in it. That's the only reason time I use Lysol, not the kills with oxygen kind or whatever. And I like hold my breath and clean the tools and then spray them, because I do have some in my garden and I want to make sure that the clean beds are still clean, or a 10% bleach will do it.
So this cannot come in on seed? If you plant from seed, so you're okay with not getting clubroot?
Yes, I actually read that in the research. It is not transmitted in seed.
Okay. I only plant by seed, so I guess that's why I've never seen it. So
that's good.
I think we'll continue. Yeah, I think I'll continue that. So
sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah. Yeah. And also, if you borrow a tool, you want to make sure that tool doesn't have any soil on it. And then also hit it with whatever you have to, the Lysol or the bleach. So anyway, you're supposed to dig it out, don't pull it out. So you want to get as much of the roots out, get the soil around the thing. I actually did this on a start years and years ago, and I didn't have any problems until I borrowed the tool. So get that out, and then they want you to put it in a bag in the garbage can. I know that seems like very not eco, but it's like, don't put it in the compost bin. So kind of dramatic, huh? But anyway, what we're doing here is not just trying to depress you with all the things that can kill your garden, but just put these in your quiver so that you know what things are. So we get a lot of blights. The pictures in the lower right corner, that's actual late blight. And then there are lots of other bacterial cankers and blights and stuff. And we tend around here, I find that we tend to call them all late blight. But the fact is that late in the season around here, it's hard for tomatoes. So they tend to get various cankers and black, leaf diseases and stuff like that late in the season. Even when we think we've got late blight, we quite often don't actually have late blight. But to avoid late blight specifically, we want to use fresh seed potato. And if your potatoes come up volunteer from your previous bed, probably don't don't leave those, because if there were blight in those, one of various blights that can hit them, that can also hit tomatoes, they will have it because the potato was living tissue over winter. You will hear that it's soil borne and that your plants can get late blight specifically from the soil or from dead material in the soil. I have been told over and over again by the head of the plant pathology lab for Washington State University that we do not have a version of it in the US that can overwinter in dead material in the soil. But the fungal spores can blow like 30 miles. So it's more of a preventive thing, or trying to get our tomatoes ripe before we get anything like this, but it likes misty, damp conditions. And here we have some other bacterial spots and wilts and things like that. So we can protect our plants from moisture. Don't water the leaves, water the ground. We can use healthy transplants. We can take diseased plant material and get rid of it at the end of the season out of the bed if it actually has diseases on it, because some of them are not late blight and some of them do overwinter on dead material. And don't compost if you got sick plants. Those plants are not going to go in your compost. And you can, ask John McInnes. John McInnes, tell us your answer to beating late blight, please.
Yeah, to beat late blight, what I do is I just beat late blight seasonally. In other words, I plant varieties that beat it, and they're done. They've already produced, and a lot of them are not indeterminate, but determinate plants, bush tomatoes, where they have a shorter season. So the late blight comes on in my indeterminate if I plant those in a given year. But so all my plants that I get most of my production out of are the plants that have the varieties that have beaten the late blight. So they're done and gone and shutting down by the time late blight shows up.
Right. So you beat it temporarily in time. You grow tomatoes that are going to get to a moderate size as a plant, set tomatoes, ripen them, and be done. And then late blight shows up at the end of September and they're done, right? Your tomatoes have already produced. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and when I grow in squim, and I have multiple properties, when I grow in squim, for strange reason, I get more of a problem with late blight than I do in Polsbo. In Polsbo, I don't have as much of a problem with it, but in any event, I'm done at that point in time. Everything's already, canned and frozen or given away or whatever. So, yeah, right. my philosophy is just beat it. Use plant varieties that are shorter season varieties and just beat it.
Beat it to the finish line, you might say.
Yep.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to do it. People also use some varieties are more resistant than others. So there is a link for some resistant varieties on the resource page. Let's see, Matt's wild cherry, for example, blight resistant. You can make yourself a little house. Some people do that. I've done that sometimes. It kind of depends on the year whether or not it's worth it. 2 years ago, it was worth it. Last year, everything was really warm, so it wasn't really worth it. They're showing this tomato plant off for their product. So the tomato plant is not in the house, but the rest of them are. And you can prune indeterminate tomatoes so that they have better airflow around them. So you can prune them and grow them on a trellis like this. And I think this looks quite sparse. And you might think, well, if you prune them, they're going to be like really skinny. But there are 3 pruned tomatoes right here, and they're quite robust. They've got a lot of green on them, right? So pruning, I'm not saying you have to do this, but if you have indeterminate tomatoes, you can put up a really tall fence. This is 7 feet tall right here that it's growing on. It's a little trellis. And then this is 1 leader. This is the main leader right here. But these little suckers that come out right here, you could leave 2 of them the most robust one is going to be the one right before the first flower cluster. And then I usually leave another one, and I let them become 3 growth points. So I have one stem going up there. This one I push out to the side so it grows up. This one I push to the other side so it grows up. And then all the other suckers I clip off. And again, I would think, if I were you, I would think, oh, that's going to be really sparse looking, but these are all pruned. So it's a possibility if you want to increase the airflow, if that's a problem for you, or if you want to fit your tomatoes into a smaller space and just grow them up like that. I find that is very doable. And you don't have to tie them to the trellis, you just stick them in and out of the fencing. This is particularly big, it's 6-inch squares. I don't know if you can see that, but it's easy to put the tomatoes in and out. Powdery mildew, maybe you growers, experienced growers, have some powdery mildew ideas. This hits us at the end of the year when the air becomes moister, but the ground is very dry. And there is plenty of evidence that plants with dry roots are more susceptible to fungus, including powdery mildew. And I think one of the things we do is we plant a squash plant, let's say a big pumpkin, and we think, well, I'll water really far out from the base. I'll water a foot out from its base. And we keep watering there. And the pumpkin's roots by that time are way out into the soil because the soil's still moist, but it's reaching its roots feet out into the soil. And then the soil dries up. And those roots that are out there are left dry because we're not thinking, oh, there are probably roots way out there. So I think in years when I am more careful about distributing the water for those plants and making sure I'm not just watering right near the stem, I get less powdery mildew. Also, if you can keep the humidity down, so you can morning water and maybe water just the soil instead of the leaves. Powdery mildew actually rinses off very easily as a spore, but if it's humid or if it's already established, you can't rinse it off. So spores are like the seeds. So before they get embedded, they're easy to rinse off. The spores are easy to rinse off. Oh, and Heidi Madden told me also when you get them wet, the hyphae explode, but they grow back really easily. So once they're established, if you get them wet, they say, oh, thank you. And they just keep growing. So they like high overcast, humid, slightly humid days. So what can we do about this? So maybe water only the soil and water early so you reduce humidity during the night. You can choose resistant varieties. I'll show you something about that in a little bit. You cannot cure this leaf, but you can prevent this from ever happening with once you know that you get this on, say, a favorite squash plant every year, you can spray. Some people say baking soda works. I do not have experience with it working. And there is some science that says baking soda doesn't really work. I don't find that sulfur works, and I have read that it doesn't. There are a couple of bacterial sprays that you can use, and those bacteria get on the leaves and then they outcompete the fungus. So those are preventative, and I have links for the sources for these on the resource page. But again, just making sure that the roots are healthy, that the soil is moist enough, not overwatered, just not that bone dry, really helps my plants. Neem oil is popular, but it kills everything. So just because it's organic does not mean it isn't a broad insecticide or, can harm other things. So it can kill, I shouldn't say everything, but it can kill bees, for example. You do have to reapply these preventative measures weekly and anytime it rains. So rather than this kind of pump sprayer, I would get this kind with a wand so you can spray if you really want to. I don't end up spraying because I find that just providing appropriately dispersed water for the roots of the few plants that get it is useful for me, and irrigating in the morning at the soil level and choosing resistant varieties too. So in a sec, I think I can show you what resistant varieties look like. Okay, this is called rust. It's not really rust, it's a fungus. If you over nitrogen plants, especially alliums, it can make them more susceptible to rust because they do a lot of tender growth, and the rust can eat that tender growth more easily. You can't cure the leaves once they've got it. That again, the bacillus, this particular kind, can compete with that rust if you want to use it. I'm mentioning like a lot of sprays that you could be putting on your garden. I don't do a lot of sprays. I try to instead make sure that my cultural practices are better for the plants. So choosing, it's like when you water and things like that. And for my garlic, making sure that I don't put too much nitrogen on them in the springtime. Does anybody have a rust solution in their garden? Or a practice that you do? Nope. Okay. But if you see that, that's what that is. Some years we'll have really bad rust, and so will the farmers around here. And other years I don't have rust, and I think, oh, I wonder how the farmers did, and they didn't have it either. So it kind of is seasonal too, depends on the conditions. There are some non-living factors too. That's sunburn. I just thought you'd want to know. Basil is really easily susceptible to sunburn. That's when you take your seedlings out of the house and you think, I'll get them used to the sun, and they just burn. But their new leaves will grow back fine. They're okay. This is blossom end rot. It's commonly identified as a calcium deficiency, but a lot of times it's just because of inconsistent watering. So if you make your watering more consistent and maybe mulch the surface of the ground so it doesn't dry out as easily, and then if it doesn't go away with more consistent watering, you might have a soil test and see if you're calcium deficient and if your pH is too high or too low. A lot of times we assume it's a calcium deficiency and we dump calcium on because it has a reputation as being calcium deficiency. But that's not always a calcium deficiency in the soil. And inconsistent water can create a calcium deficiency in the fruit itself temporarily. Sometimes the first tomato or two will have it, and then nobody else has it after that. There are various nutrient deficiencies. Often it is a pH problem in the soil, or too much of one element, like too much phosphorus, so that it competes with the calcium. So just dumping more of things onto the plants, not necessarily the long-term solution. So if you're seeing nutrient deficiencies show up, I would get a soil test. And if you want to learn about getting a soil test, you want to see the May class, the May video from the Veg Club. So even if you see like your tomatoes getting purple, that might be a phosphorus problem, but I wouldn't dump a lot of phosphorus on the soil. These guys can get purple even because if it's cold, because they're not able to transport that phosphorus as effectively if it's cold. If your blueberries go look iron deficient, that's a pH problem very often in the soil because blueberries like super low pH. So if you see nutrient deficiencies that are like persistent and you can't figure out what it is, you might want a soil test. So we'll check that out. You can check it out. So overall, you can take in all of the clues. Like if you go to a nursery and you bring a leaf, they say, what's the plant look like? Did it affect all of them? Did you check the roots on any of the plants? So if it's every plant in every carrot in the row, every brassica, and you have 40 brassicas and they're all exactly the same, that might be a nutritional thing in the soil, right? But if it's one of them, that might be something contagious. So we want to know if it's the whole bunch or not. Also, just checking, does one of them have dry feet? Is the sprinkler not working? Not sprinkler, but the drip line. when not working. And then all the parts. Is it on the stems and the leaves? And then you can also, in addition to taking it to your nursery or looking it up online, there are links for disease detection on the resource page. You can also submit it to the Washington State University Path Lab. I think it costs you $40, and you can ask them how to send the material. But I've done it a couple of times. It was very useful, very neat. That's a great thing that's available to us. Yeah, oops, this says April 23. See the April video for keeping your soil ecosystem healthy. Soil ecosystem is hugely important. It can be the difference between you looking at a neighbor's garden and saying, what are they doing? I want to know the one thing that they put on it to make it do that. And it turns out they've just built a really good ecosystem through some really simple cultural practices. And a lot of times it's what they don't do. You know, they're even lazier than you are. So their soil ecosystem is better. So check out the April video. And you know by now to keep your foliage dry. And oh, you can plant some resistant varieties. Let's look. These are called disease codes. If you find something that says a plant in a catalog and it says PM at the end, that means it's powdery mildew resistant. And all of these letters mean something different. So there's a link here so that you know if you want, say, pea enation mosaic virus, that's a thing that kills peas in the summertime around here. You look that up and you know that you're looking in the catalogs or online for a variety that's PEMV that fights that. By the way, that pea that is PEMV resistant is called Maestro. That's a pea for the summer around here. Let's see what else. And then in the catalog entry, it would look like this. See right here? There's Maestro. It's pea nation mosaic virus and powdery mildew resistant. So this is a great one to plant in July for a fall crop. Got that? We already did that. Oh yeah, rotate your vegetables. Here's the deal. It helps if you have a simple little map of your garden. That's a map of my garden. Done spontaneously on lined paper so I could make semi-straight lines. And I just wrote stuff down. And it says here, I put melons here. So the following year, I'm not going to put melons here. I'm going to put them somewhere else. It helps if you're not so jumbly the way I am. I had garlic in here and broccoli, and I have these all mixed up. I've done a little better lately in that in one bed, I'll put everything related to a tomato that grows in the heat. So tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants go in this one bed because they're all susceptible to the similar kinds of diseases. And then look at this. We usually rotate. It's called rotation. We're going to pretend this is a garden bed. The dark green one is one of our beds. The pale green one is another bed, and the other colors are also beds. This year, everything related to potatoes. So for me, it's eggplants and tomatoes and peppers all go in this bed. And then these are all my things related to cabbages. Next year, all of these guys are going in that bed and everybody moves to the right. So that's why it's called rotation. You want minimum of 3 years between plantings. So this one should be brassicas this year, but then not brassicas for 3 years. And then the brassicas can come back. So who's related to whom? Oh, well, we're going to skip mammals here, I think. Oops, I don't have the who's related to whom. I do have it on the resource page, who's in what category. There are a lot more categories than this, but in the Northwest, we usually just worry about brassicas, things related to beans, and things related to tomatoes. and maybe onions and garlic. And the reason we rotate is that if there's a bug that's in the soil and we put, let's say peas in there, we want to move those out for 3 years so that thing that likes to eat peas reduces in population and hopefully maybe even dies off. So that's what rotation is all about. I guess we'll take a look at mammals. I like these. John says it doesn't keep rabbits away, but I've stopped using these because I don't really have much of a deer problem anymore, but they really worked for the deer. Does anybody use these motion activated sprinklers?
They work really well for gardeners who are not paying attention to their gardens in their yard.
I know. I was like tense for a couple of years after I stopped using these, but they're very effective. You can turn them off. You can say how sensitive they have to be and how far out and how high and how low they spray. So if you don't have the opportunity to fence, or you rent, or you just don't feel like spending thousands of dollars on a fence, I've found them to be effective. And they don't go off all the time because they train the deer. But John, you said not rabbits, right? Which has been
they weren't as effective on rabbits because if you have to dial it down, then it's next to the lawn. Anyway, they work. Okay. They work really well for deer, and they work really well for unsuspecting gardeners who walk into the path without knowing it.
Yeah, it's a horrible experience, especially if you're like a foot away. It's really awful. Anyway, you'll get trained quickly to shut them off. Anyway, I have used them for a long time. I really like them, but I don't have to use them anymore because my neighbor got a giant dog, so I don't have deer. But this is concrete reinforcing wire bent into a long, low tunnel this is not bird netting. Bird netting is a horrible, irritating thing to work with. This is deer netting. It's a little bit heavier and you can stretch it over. See, it's over the end also. Ideally, I would have a piece of wood like this one running across here and the netting would be stuck onto it. I can pull this off with one hand. This is actually 2 of them. Each one is, in this case, I think 7 feet long. I can pull it off with one hand, toss it off to the side and pick strawberries. So I have it over anything that the rabbits like to eat. And it's not that many things that the rabbits are eating in my yard, but definitely the deer and the rabbits are crazy for the strawberries. Yeah, they're very useful. And it's remesh. This is concrete reinforcing wire in my case. I like it because I do pick them up and move them a lot, and it's a little more rigid than fencing. Fencing, if I were to pick it up and toss it off to the side, would bend more than I want to. But if you never move them, like John McInnes was saying, his are just going to stay. So his galvanized welded wire sounds really good. Yeah, so that's a possibility. That is in the March class and the March resource page. By the way, if you watch any video and you want the resource page, just email me at the email address given in the chat. Any question, if you want to get reminders, if you want the new Zoom link for July, do let me know. It's me. It's Carol at Hawkeye. Look what's happening next month. Maybe we should ask, wait, does anybody have anything else to say about pests?
I wondered, Carol, if you have any suggestions for dealing with flea beetles.
I do. What are they on?
They like tomatoes, potatoes, and beans, but I think they've also started on my zinnias.
Oh, they like your garden. That's not very nice of them.
And they're terrible.
They're terrible. So they're doing.
I have them on my eggplants too.
Oh yeah, they like.
Oh yeah, I've had a little bit on my eggplants before. Yeah. Do you find that your plants outgrow them?
Well, I start everything in seed in the greenhouse and I wait to put it out until it's big. Every year I wait longer so they get bigger so they can outgrow it more. Yeah. The closer they are to the ground, the more they get damaged.
Yeah, I have found, and a farmer whom I've discussed this with said his potatoes always get it at the beginning, but they outgrow them. That's probably not helpful for you because you maybe aren't outgrowing them, but it's a possibility if your plants are growing robustly that they can outgrow it. Like it's not really a problem once the plant is big because it's further from the ground. So do you find that the plant, once the potato's big or the tomato is big, it's okay?
Yeah, pretty much. It's just if I have a couple of bean plants that are complete lace now, and the plant is just so compromised, it's not going to make.
Have the beans been growing fast?
Some of them have grown fast enough to outgrow, and I think there's just a couple of sacrificial ones that are the lacy.
So, yeah, making sure that you're planting late enough so that the plant is growing fast is helpful.
Okay.
Over 10% loss on leaves generally doesn't affect the productivity. That's like the standard thing that ag advisors say. But if they're causing them to turn to lace, that's a problem. I have very carefully applied diatomaceous earth. So diatomaceous earth, as I said, is just a mechanical, it's very sharp, powdery stuff. So if I had anybody else do it, I'd make them wear a really tight mask, but because you don't want to breathe that. But and I would just put it on super close to the plant and apply it to the leaves and maybe a little bit around in the soil because I want those flea beetles to run into it. Sorry? On
the leaves. Put it on the leaves as well as the
Well,
soil.
I don't want it to stay on there in large quantities because I want the plant to be able to do photosynthesis, right?
Yeah.
And not have the light reflected. But I have done that before. I did it once. Yeah. And if you really think they're in your soil, like they seem pretty, like they're pretty endemic to your yard.
I think that's true.
Then probably a row cover isn't going to make a difference. But if you do find that you could try a row cover, but you might just have flea beetles underneath, especially once they already have attacked.
I think they're already in the soil and they just come up from the soil. So
yeah. And of course you have to diatomaceous earth works when it's dry. So when it's raining, it's not really helping. Anybody got any other advice? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for all the solutions, my friends, and for all the questions. And
do you have time for another question?
Yeah, I do. Do you, John? Do we need to get out of here? Okay. John says, okay.
All right. Oh, but back to my peas. So I did have a few of my pea starts work out okay, and I transplanted them, and I just a couple of days ago harvested 3 sugar snap peas and 2 shelling peas that were ready. The shelling peas are great. The sugar snaps, each one had a little hole drilled in it by something. Does that sound like anything?
It does, and I can't remember what it's called. Does anybody know the name of that? Generally, if I have that happen, it's only 1 or 2. But I might, could you email me about that, Debbie? And
yes.
I can look into it.
Yes.
It's a common thing. It's like a pea weevil.
Okay.
I feel like it is a pea weevil. Yeah, and I can see what if I can find anything about that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next month, tell your friends. If you're thinking, oh, I didn't really get my garden going, it's too late. It's not too late. And if you're thinking, oh, my garden's full, but I would love to have fall food or winter food, that's possible too, even though your garden has stuff in it right now. You can grow so much food here for winter, for either storage or most often, it'll just keep in the garden. It'll keep in the garden. It will not go bad. It will not bolt in the wintertime. It will just sit there like a fridge that's in suspended animation. It is amazing. So you could do a little bit for fall if you want a fall harvest. You could do fall and winter. You can even have some things that are harvested in February and March. And it's a lot of food. So you see this picture, you have to kind of squint and move close to it. All of these things are things that we plant to eat in the wintertime in the garden. And a lot of them start, you'd think in September or something, but that's not true because they can't grow fast enough to make food before the days get too short. So it starts in July. So if you show up, I will tell you what you can plant and give you a planting calendar for exactly when to plant. And yeah, and be ready to plant when we meet next time. And even if you don't have room, some of your stuff is going to be coming out. Or you can plant in cells, and we're going to talk about how do you plant your plants in July, beginning of July, so that when something does come out of your ground, then you're ready to put something in. So it's pretty powerful, and it's very, very fun to eat like a squirrel in the middle of the winter. So I'm glad you came, and that's the name of that tune. Do get on my mailing list by emailing me if you can. I mean, if you aren't on it already. What do you think, John?
I think there's another great class, lots of information. Thank you, Carol.
Sweet of you. Thank you to everybody who came.